What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through the best fantasy football draft strategy if you are picking at the end of the first round. Over the last couple of days, I've gone through early round one, mid round one. Today, we are focusing on the 109 through the 112. If you enjoy the video, do me a huge favor, hit that like button and subscribe. Going to be going through some of the best early round targets and then diving into 4 different mock drafts from the 109, 110, 111, and 112, just kind of showing you what teams you can put together here. But let's just dive right into the round one targets. We obviously want to be hitting on our round one picks, and I actually feel like consensus ADP is pretty on point with the first 12 players. This is from 4 for 4, trying to get some consensus data. And so I don't necessarily agree on like the direct order of these guys, but I do agree with the 12 players that are in the top 12. And so I think anyone, within this top 12 from the 107 through the 112, the guys in green, I think these are all very solid picks in the first round. I do think Puka Nacua is the 107. I actually have CMC up at the 108. So I think those would be like the best picks. In my opinion, I know CMC's, a little up in the air. But then I think Neighbors, Genty, Nico Collins, Amon-Ra, I think they all kind of fit into like that 109, 112 area. Derrick Henry, Devon Achane, we're going to talk about them in a little bit. I think they're fine in round 2, but wouldn't want to spend a round 1 pick on those guys. Now looking at round 2, the 1-2 turn here, obviously CMC, Nico Collins, those guys are falling into round 2. I think they're smash picks. I like them in round 1, like them even more in round 2. For Derrick Henry, I have him here as a fine pick. I'm not going to say he's a smash in the early second, but I think he's fine coming off an RB4 season in points per game. I know some people are going to roll their eyes. There's some concern about his age, the amount of wear and tear he's had on his body. At some point, right, like he has to slow down. It hasn't happened yet, and he's, managed to defy father time at the running back position. But at some point, there is going to be a dip. And I think I'd be a little bit higher if I thought his ceiling was higher. And he just was the running back 4, almost hit 20 points per game. But I do think an RB1 finish from Derrick Henry seems pretty out there just based on the fact that he doesn't get that receiving production. So he could repeat. He could be the RB4, RB5, and you feel fine with it. So like I said, I think he's a decent pick here in the early second. Would prefer a few other options, but not going to hate on the pick. We do have Devon Achane, and I do have Achane ranked ahead of Derrick Henry. Now, maybe he's a little bit more fragile, right? He's a smaller running back. He's had some injury issues. Tua's had some health concerns. This is not a good offensive line, but I do think he has a higher ceiling than Derrick Henry. And when you look at his first 2 NFL seasons, in 2023, if you take out the games where he was playing like very limited snaps, either due to just like breaking into the offense or like leaving early with injury, he was going to be like a 22, 23 plus point per game guy. You look at last year, you just take the sample size where Tua is healthy as the starting quarterback. Once again, he's like a 22, 23 point per game option. Now, there are some ifs, right? Like he has to stay healthy. Tua has to stay healthy. But I think there's certainly a possibility that we're looking, back on this season and Achane is potentially the running back 1 overall. And I just don't think that's a ceiling that Derrick Henry has. So I do like Achane here, getting him in the early second. I think is a nice value. Then we're going to go with Brock Bowers here and Brian Thomas Jr. I think both these guys are really nice picks. For Brian Thomas Jr., I have him as the 201, so the 13th overall player. I think anywhere in round 2 is a nice value. And then for Bowers, I know sometimes people get sketched out drafting a tight end this early. I just think you look at the skill set of Brock Bowers, what he did as a rookie was insanely impressive, and he did it on like a bad offense, right? Like not a good quarterback, not a high-scoring unit, and he was still a high-end tight end 1. And I think he's a guy where you look at some of the wide receivers in this range, Drake London, A.J. Brown going a little bit after, he has the potential to just straight up outproduce those dudes while also giving you an insane positional advantage at the tight end position. And then a couple of guys who I just don't like in this range, Jonathan Taylor, Drake London. I'm cool with those guys in the middle of the second, early round 2, just not a fan. Now, moving into round 3, keep in mind this is late round 3, some of these targets. Tyreek Hill, don't think he's going to be here a ton, could be platform dependent, but I think he's well worth the risk in the late 3rd round. I'm fine with Garrett Wilson here, coming around on his situation, clear wide receiver 1. Fields, not like the dream quarterback to play with for a fantasy wide receiver, but he was the quarterback for DJ Moore's best fantasy season. I like Garrett Wilson's teammate, Breece Hall, believe in the talent, 3-down skill set. I think the efficiency is going to be there with the threat of Justin Fields' legs. And Fields, despite being a mobile quarterback, is willing to check down to the running back position. I think Devontae Adams is a fine wide receiver pick in this range, does have some age concerns. Wide receivers can kind of fall off at any point, especially when you're like 32 years old. But he's coming off a solid season. He's going to a great situation with the Rams. And I think a lot of people, including myself, feel like Cooper Kupp has taken a pretty significant dip. And he was still very productive playing with the Rams, just in that system with McVay, Matthew Stafford at quarterback. I think Rashee Rice is a smash pick in the late third. If you're getting him in the fourth round, like, that is insane. I'd consider him at the 2-3 turn. Just the upside you could get for Patrick Mahomes, wide receiver one. You look at the production he gave you the last 6 games of 2023 and then the first 3 games of 2024. And that was, in 2 years where the Chiefs offense wasn't even humming. Rashee Rice has high-end wide receiver one upside, and getting that in the 3-4 area is very valuable. And then the players I don't really love in this range, George Kittle, just not super high on him repeating what he did last year. James Cook, I just don't think he has the upside at the running back position. I think last year, given his usage, was pretty close to his peak outcome. And then Terry McLaurin, just super touchdown dependent, kind of similar to James Cook. I'm actually fine with him as like the wide receiver 18. I just don't want to draft the wide receiver 18 in the late third round. And then some guys that weren't mentioned, or one dude that wasn't mentioned, but I do like in this range, Omarion Hampton, according to consensus ADP, he's going a little bit later, but I do think he could be like a later season league winner for you. Might be a slow start, might be frustrating with Najee, but when you need him in that playoff push into the playoffs, I do think he could be your guy. But now let's dive into the mock drafts here. So we're going to start off with the 9th overall pick. So the 109, I went best player available. That was Puka Nacua. Then in round 2, I go with Brock Bowers. Like I said, I love getting Brock Bowers pretty much anywhere in the round 2 area. So I like that start. Locked on our wide receiver 1 and our tight end 1. Then we go back-to-back running back in round 3 and round 4. Typically not something I love doing, but this year I think there are some interesting guys in the mix here. Also a Breece Hall that could be going in this range. So Chase Brown obviously does have some risk because he is very volume dependent. These day 3 running backs don't tend to work out, but it's a pretty wide open running back room. They force-fed him last year, even with, a little bit of a dip in his overall usage on a good offense. I still think he can be very productive as an RB1. And then I mentioned I do like Omarion Hampton. You don't draft a running back in round 1 to keep him behind Najee Harris, who you gave, $5 million to on a 1-year deal. So I think at some point Hampton's going to break out. This is a good offense. It's a very good offensive line. They want to run the ball. I think he's going to be great over the second half. Then we get a couple of wide receivers. Really like Tet McMillan in the 5th round. These rookie wide receivers, especially, the very talented ones, top 10 guys, they do come with a lot of upside. You think about your Jamar Chases, your Justin Jeffersons. I think it's a fine year 1 situation. Not amazing, but Bryce Young looked like he turned a corner last year. I like Dave Canales. And there's also just very limited target competition. Not that that's what's going to make him break out, but I'm a believer in the talent. So I think the player's good. The fact that they might just force feed him is definitely a positive. And then for Jalen Waddle, I know he was really bad last year. I still think he has a decently high floor. We saw it through 3 seasons, plus maybe some extra upside if Tyreek Hill does not bounce back. Then we get my running back 3 in round 7. This is not something I'm going to do a lot, like get a third running back, especially in the round 7 spot. But I do think there's a pretty clear fall off after DeAndre Swift. And it does feel kind of gross to draft DeAndre Swift here. But you just look at the Bears depth chart. There's not a lot going on there at the running back position. I do want pieces of this offense. I think Ben Johnson's going to turn this thing around. And so based on the price, I felt decent about what I could get at wide receiver in the next few rounds. I went with DeAndre Swift. Then we hammered 3 straight wide receivers. I do like having wide receivers through the flex +2 that I feel decent about playing. So we go Jacoby Myers, Josh Downs, and Emeka Egbuka. I think Myers and Downs are both some of the best picks you can get in round 8 and round 9. Jacoby Myers, he doesn't seem like a super exciting, flashy pick, but this guy has been a wide receiver 3 or better in the last 4 seasons. He's been a top 24 wide receiver in points per game in back-to-back years, and he's done that on bad offenses. He's now getting the best quarterback play of his career with Geno Smith coming in. I think he's a really safe and some upside to be a mid-tier wide receiver 2, and you're getting him in round 8. And then for Josh Downs, this was a year 2 player who in a bad situation was the wide receiver 28 in points per game, commands targets at a very high level, 6th highest target rate last year. In round 9, that's a steal. And then Emeka Egbuka, obviously I'm not expecting him to come in and ball out in week one. There's some concerns that he just gets pinned behind Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, but there are also ways where this does kind of break right for him. You could have Chris Godwin maybe having a setback with his injury recovery, not being ready week one. Mike Evans, 32 years old, could start to slip. He's also had some recent injuries. So there are ways where things could open up for Emeka Egbuka, and it just comes down to the fact that I am a believer in the player. I think he's a very good wide receiver. I think he's pro-ready, especially, amongst these rookie guys. I think he can come in and be a very productive starter right away, and so maybe it doesn't pan out, but like I said, an injury here, a slower recovery here, and all of a sudden he's a top 2 wide receiver week one or at some point throughout the season. And then we get our quarterback here with Justin Fields. Justin Fields is really my favorite late round quarterback pick. Late round 9, Justin Fields with his rushing upside, I think is too good to pass up. We go Kyle Williams at wide receiver. Didn't need another wide receiver, but of those super late round wideouts, he is my favorite. And then a couple of running backs with Jalen Wright and Jarquez Hunter. So overall, obviously feel great about the tight end position. Feel very solid about our wide receivers. Wide receiver 2, maybe a little bit sketchy, but I think Tet could certainly be that. I think Jacoby Myers could certainly be a back-end option. Feel good about Josh Downs. And then, decent bench, get some depth running backs, some younger wide receivers who could break out later in the year. Now moving over to the second mock draft from the 110, this is going to be a double hero RB start. We go with Christian McCaffrey and Devon Achane. Now I feel like this team has a very wide range of outcomes. This could be just an absolute juggernaut, or it could be a team where we're sitting at week 5 and both our running backs are on injured reserve and we're completely cooked because McCaffrey, Achane, they do have some health concerns, CMC especially, but I think it's also possible end of the season we're looking back and these are the top 2 running backs in points per game, and so I'm willing to take that swing. Obviously going too early running backs, we want to hammer the wide receiver position, and this is what we do in the next 6 rounds. We go Rashee Rice, already talked about why I like him, Devontae Adams, DK Metcalf, Travis Hunter, Chris Godwin, Juwan Jennings. I think Devontae Adams here in the early 4th is a very fair price. Obviously, there's some risk with the age, but played well last year, like I mentioned, and in a very good offensive environment. DK Metcalf, kind of been someone I've been fading over the last few years, but I think his price has kind of, cooled off a little bit in a reasonable spot. Travis Hunter, I know he is going to be a controversial player. Is he a corner? How much offense is he going to play? I just think that he's going to get some opportunities early on. If he plays well, which I am confident, I'm a believer in the talent. If he plays well, I don't think they're just going to start pulling him off the field. And so it's a swing. I get it, but that's why we have, 6 potential playable wide receivers here. Then I go with Chris Godwin. I just talked about, how he could have some injury concerns, especially, that could boost Emeka Egbuka. But this was a dude who was pacing to be a high-end wide receiver 1 last year, coming off an injury. Now I can get him late round 7. I think both can be viable picks. And then I go with Juwan Jennings, potential 49ers wide receiver 1, getting him in the 8th round. Then we get our 3rd running back with Jordan Mason, potential handcuff guy with Aaron Jones, also could potentially work himself into a committee. Then this is going to be another Justin Fields team, like I talked about, my favorite late round option. Then we go Tucker Kraft in round 11, one of my favorite later round tight end picks. Just kind of hoping he hits in the touchdown department, going to be on a good offense. 2 more running backs with Ray Davis and Tyler Algier, both kind of just clear-cut handcuffs. And then we threw a dart at a tight end. Mason Taylor could be nothing, but we do have Justin Fields, maybe his rookie tight end, kind of spark something early on. With the next mock draft from the 111, thought it'd be interesting to go with an Ashton Genty start. So we go Genty 111. I get my guy BTJ at the 202. Late round 3, we go with Devontae Adams. And then this is not something I'm going to do a lot, but I went with a early round 4 Jaden Daniels. So like I said, not going to be a typical approach here. I'm typically going to be waiting at quarterback this season unless I get a mid to late round 3 Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson. But let's just see how this draft plays out. If we like it, maybe it's something I'll go to a little bit more often. Didn't like the running back value in those middle rounds, round 5, round 6. So we go with Xavier Worthy, George Pickens. I like Rashee Rice. I also like the upside of Xavier Worthy, even if they are kind of competing bets. And then George Pickens, I think he has some slept on upside. We've seen in a lot of situations where you can have 2 wide receivers, where you have one stud who's going to be a mid to high end wide receiver one. The other one sneaks in as like a back end or fringe wide receiver one. I think that could be the case with CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens finally playing in like a good offensive environment, has a good deep ball quarterback in Dak Prescott. Then we get Caleb Johnson, late round 7. Not a profile I love. I think he's kind of, higher floor, low ceiling, especially for a rookie, but we need a running back too. I think he's serviceable. And then our last 2 wide receivers here, Jacoby Myers and Matthew Golden. Talked about why I'm very in on Jacoby Myers. Golden, not a huge fan of him as a prospect, but like you're getting a round 1 guy in a wide open wide receiver room in the late 9th. It's pretty reasonable in my opinion. And then we go with Cam Scatterbo to be our running back 3. Maybe not ideal. We're kind of relying on like these rookie running backs, especially early on in the season, but we do kind of correct that with our next pick where we snag J.K. Dobbins. So throughout the season, Caleb Johnson, Cam Scatterbo, they're probably going to be rising in their usage, gaining momentum in their backfields, whereas J.K. Dobbins might start off as the lead back, and then you're probably going to see him concede touches to R.J. Harvey throughout the year. Then we get one more running back, more of a handcuff in Tyler Algier. And then with our last 2 picks, we hit up the tight end position with Hunter Henry and Brenton Strange. Obviously don't feel great about either of those dudes, but Henry, getting a veteran, could easily be like a fringe tight end 1. Hopefully Drake May takes a step forward. And then for Brenton Strange, you're betting on a younger option, see what he can do with Evan Ingram out of the picture. And then we move on to our final mock draft here from the 112. I think this is a really fun start. In general, I really like the starts you can get with these later round 1 picks. But we go Malik Neighbors, BTJ at the 1-2 turn. And then I think I love our 3-4 turn even more. We go Breece Hall and Rashee Rice. Breece Hall, Rashee Rice is like a 2-3 turn that I'd consider. We're getting these guys 3-4 area. Then our next 3 picks, we go Tet McMillan, Jalen Waddle, Juwan Jennings, all guys who I think are values at the wide receiver position. Now at this point, we are very wide receiver heavy. I wouldn't say that's ideal, but it's kind of just the way like the value played out, and I didn't really want to reach at another position. So we're pretty much capped at wide receiver here with 6. So in the next 3 rounds, we go running back, Brian Robinson, Cam Scatterbo, Zach Charbonnet. For Brian Robinson, probably not going to draft a ton of him, but higher floor, low ceiling, not going to win you your league, but also not going to lose it for you. He's a serviceable RB2 early on. Scatterbo has the opportunity to emerge in his backfield. Zach Charbonnet, really fun handcuff. Quarterback, we take a couple shots here. We go Drake May, Trevor Lawrence. For Trevor Lawrence, we have the connection with BTJ. For Drake May, just kind of betting on a young, potential huge year 2 leap. Also some slept on rushing upside out of Drake May. And then at tight end, we go with Jake Ferguson. And then we close it out with Roschon Johnson, who has some slept on committee upside here where maybe he just works out a role. DeAndre Swift, loses touches as he's kind of done throughout his career in some spots. Roschon becomes interesting, especially in round 14. Like the risk is just very, very low. And so that is the final roster here. Obviously, this team is built through the wide receiver position. I mean, you have 2 studs, Rice, who could easily be a higher end wide receiver 1, some guys who have wide receiver 2 potential, Tet, Waddle, Juwan Jennings. Running back, little thin, but you're hoping, some guys can emerge. You're going to churn the waiver wire. Quarterback, you're hoping one of those 2 dudes can step up and be like a fringe QB1. And then tight end, not feeling great about it. But Jake Ferguson could be serviceable. But that is going to wrap it up for this video. Hopefully this helps you guys get some different looks at how your drafts could go, what players you should be targeting. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe. Any questions, feel free to drop them down below. But thank you all for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.